Welcome to episode 23 of the second season of the Exit Philosophy podcast. He is Rich Griffin, coming to you from Oakville, Ontario, Canada. I'm Scott MacArthur, coming to you from Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. And Rich, barring the completely unforeseen, which would involve both the Blue Jays and the Athletics making the playoffs, the Jays have closed the books on their time in the much maligned, often criticized, Oakland, Alameda County Coliseum. So from a Blue Jays perspective, my friend, R.I.P. Oakland Coliseum.
Yeah, as for your potential bet, I don't even think Ipe would bet on that with the A's and the Blue Jays making the postseason this year. And the Jays' chances would rely on playing more teams like the Oakland A's. Unfortunately, they've already finished their season against the Chicago White Sox. So the schedule only gets tougher right now. But in terms of memories of the Oakland Coliseum, which has gone by many names and most of the time had very few fans, what are some of your favorite memories of the Coliseum?
So, I mean, like you, Griff, I think I can speak to both memories that are historic that I wasn't there for and memories that I did experience there. And you might even be able to add some even better context about those 1970s Oakland teams, the Vida Blue teams, the back-to-back World Series champions and all that. I wasn't alive yet, but obviously the first thing that comes to mind is Roberto Alomar's home run off of Dennis Eckersley in the fourth game of the 1992 American League Championship Series. The Blue Jays, did they lead that series 2-1 at the time, or were they trailing? This is the first time where my memory's kind of going. Did they win or lose game 5 to bring it back home and clinch it in 6? I can't believe I don't remember this. I used to have all of this off the top of my head.
You should ask your dad. He was a big fan.
Yeah, well, he's listening whenever he's listening or watching whenever he's watching, saying it out loud. But the point being, that was the home run that changed the trajectory. I want to say the Jays were up 2-1 because if they'd lost, it would have been 2-2. But Robbie hitting that home run, putting the Jays out in front, 3-1 series lead, firmly in the driver's seat. And if you're too young to remember those days, the Tony La Russa-led Oakland A's through the late 80s, early 90s were the Blue Jays' kryptonite. The 1989 Blue Jays, and this was back when when there were 4 divisions in the 2 leagues, and you had to win your division to make the playoffs, and you went right to the 7-game ALCS. The 89 Blue Jays had a terrible start, fired Jimmy Williams, Cito Gaston came in, the ship got turned around. They won the AL East with 89 victories, but Oakland, who had made the playoffs and gone to the World Series the year before, and then in a stunning development got swept by the LA Dodgers, and that was Kirk Gibson's walk-off home run off of Eckersley in Game 1 of the 88 World Series. The Jays were completely outmatched by that Oakland team. Everybody knew it. And they lost that ALCS in the newly opened Skydome in 5 games. Jose Canseco hit a home run into the 5th deck, the first one ever. That was historic. That was off of Mike Flanagan. Dave Stieb had a terrific year, but was no match for that Oakland team. And so building to 92, and Oakland, of course, won the Earthquake World Series in 89, went back to the World Series in 1990 for a 3rd straight year, and somehow Lou Piniella's Reds swept them. So they had been a perennial, star-studded, good team. So it was a big deal for the Blue Jays to simply beat Oakland and obviously get to their first ever World Series. So that's a memory, and that's the pre-Mount Davis construction. The memories I have of the Oakland Coliseum, and I was there in 2013, 2014, and 2015 covering Blue Jays series. And you and I can go a little back and forth on the whole BART, which is the Bay Area Rapid Transit Subway System, but the whole BART stop experience, walking from the stop, the subway stop, to the stadium. I'll leave that for us to chew on in a minute. There always seemed to be sewage leakage and issues in that stadium. I think one year when the Jays were there, there had been a flooding of the visitors' clubhouse only weeks prior, essentially poo water. So there was a lot of joking about that when we were there, and it probably happened in 13 because I just remember commenting on it annually and joking about it. There's that. I just remember the vastness of the stadium. So you come out behind that, behind home plate to the field for batting practice, and just the vastness of Mount Davis, the true multi-purpose stadium that it was, because it was home to the Oakland Raiders for a long time, and was when I was covering the Blue Jays, as well as the home of the Oakland A's. So it had that multi-purpose feel to it. I remember Griff in the media meal room, and I believe I've read, and I don't remember his name, but I believe I read he had passed away. The elderly man who took our money, the cashier for the media meal room in Oakland, was a guy who every time I said hello to him and every time I had brief chats with him, I'm like, this guy was definitely at Haight-Ashbury in the summer of 67.
I remember
There
that.
is no question that this grandfather was in Haight-Ashbury in the summer of 67. So I remember him, although I don't remember his name. And, you know, again, just the way that the Marine layer would come in at night and knock balls down. It was hard to hit home runs at night games. And I remember from watching games on TV when I was younger and witnessing games live in person, and Pat Tabler, having played in that stadium as a visitor with Kansas City and Toronto and Cleveland through his major league career. I just clearly remember Pat Tabler before a day game. We were standing on the field and he said, "Scotty, that's sky. That's sky. It is, any routine pop-up is almost impossible to see. And if there wasn't at least one, if not two, sunballs a couple of hours later." But I just always remember Pat Tabler talking about that sky. And we saw some of the issues. I don't believe there was a ball lost in the sun such that it was dropped or misplayed over the weekend between the Jays and A's in the series that was just played. But there were some guys fighting the sun. You saw that. That's another sort of deal with that stadium, the bright California sun off the water and all of that. So those are some of my memories.
Yeah, you mentioned the visitors clubhouse, which was obviously where, as journalists, we would spend a lot of the pregame, and everything was in that. It was a dump. It was it smelled like sewage. And they had these exercycles in the room in front of the TVs. And I swear to God that they had exercycles where the seats hadn't been swabbed down since Sal Bando was riding them, you know?
Yeah, I remember those.
The players had to walk down the ramp with the fans. Who, if the gates were open, the fans were in the walking to their box seats if anybody was there that day. And I was there in 88, 89, 90 as a member of the commissioner's PR crew. And to view the stadium itself, when you're in the stadium before Mount Davis was erected by a guy with obviously a huge ego because he ruined the stadium as a baseball stadium. It was a beautiful stadium to me, the view of the skyline in any stadium is what part of what makes it attractive. I mean, you think of Comerica Park, you think of all the stadiums around baseball, you think of Kansas City, where you can see your favorite hotel across the highway. But yeah, the view was great until they built that that monstrosity of a football grandstand, which then they abandoned and went to Las Vegas. So there's that 88, 89, 90. I wasn't at any of the 72, 73, 74. I mean, there's a huge baseball winning tradition in Oakland that should not should not be forgotten. During the World Series years that I went, 88, 89, 90, they stayed, commissioners group stayed in Oakland, Jack London Square. There was a big Marriott on the square. But of course, everybody in the evening went across on BART to San Francisco. Nobody wanted to stay in Oakland. And of course, the ultimate was the 89 World Series with the earthquake. We never got back to Oakland after Game 3 when the earthquake hit in San Francisco. I remember also in the press box, it was a dumpy press box. Like you stand up and you bump your head, you get a concussion because the ceiling was so low. But I remember looking over into the radio booth and Tom Cheek was on his obviously amazing consecutive game streak. And he was slumped over in the booth all by himself. And I went over there to see how he was. And he did not look good. He said he didn't feel good. I think his father had just passed, a famous or a heroic Air Force member of the U.S. Air Force based in Pensacola. I think that's where Tom was born. So I remember that moment because it was shortly thereafter that his streak was broken. And then, of course, he tragically passed later on. But that's one of my memories of the Coliseum. But we should not forget Jose Bautista making that a memorable spot. You were right there. I think you prompted him to spin around. Slowly he turned. And
well, yeah. So just context. And you and I had to go back and look this up. So in 20, and the reason we had to go back and look it up is some things happened in Oakland in the 3 years that I was traveling and going there. 2013, and I forget who hit the ball, but Melky Cabrera playing left field turned somebody's shot down the line from a double into a triple because he just couldn't get to the ball. And out of that came this sort of IL stint and departure from the team that was later to be revealed as this benign tumor that Melky had growing in his spine, and that was limiting his movement, and he hadn't been hitting well, and etc. Fast forward a year later, and we're there over the 4th of July holiday. And Oakland was a good team in 2014, and you may recall that they swung a deal with the Red Sox to bring in John Lester, and they swung a deal with the Chicago Cubs to bring in Jeff Samardzija. And what they sent to the Cubs included Addison Russell, who we later found out was a horrible human being, but he was a member and a somewhat significant contributor to the team in Chicago that overcame the 108-year World Series drought in 2016.
Considered a huge prospect at the time. So it looked
and
like
a huge and you know who else was in that deal, Griff, from Oakland to Chicago? Billy McKinney.
Well, that's right. It was still
Billy McKinney was in that deal.
Yeah.
And we know that Billy McKinney would be a Blue Jay and have a cup of coffee with, I think, the Yankees. Anyway, I'm digressing as I so often do. But we're there, and the season is starting to come off the rails for the Jays. They'd had that wonderful May. Juan Francisco looked like Babe Ruth for a month, and then people started throwing him curveballs, and he looked like somebody who would fit in with the 2024 Blue Jays. Just put it that way. Zing. Sorry. So there's a situation where, and again, it involved Melky Cabrera. Blue Jays are down a couple of runs, 8th inning. Jose Bautista doubles home Melky Cabrera, but Melky is thrown out at the plate. A replay, which was still relatively new at the time, is called for, And there is at least one camera angle that shows that Oakland catcher Derek Norris, as he swipe tags Melky Cabrera, completely misses him. But the call on the field, which was out, is upheld. It's not confirmed, but the call stood after the people in New York got a look at it. And the Jays would not score that inning, give up a couple more in the bottom of the eighth, lose the game 5-1. For context with Jose, we weren't Jose's favorite people.
Put it mildly.
But that's kind of sometimes what made it even better and even more interesting when suddenly he had a message. And you may recall that early in 2013, he made a comment about umpiring. I don't like my productivity being affected by others' mediocrity or something to that effect.
In a more intense fashion, he phrased it far more intensely than you just did.
Yeah. So Jose, so they've lost 5-1. The clubhouse doors open. And Jose was never voluntarily hanging out at his locker after games. Like, we would ask for him, and if he was available right away, he might come out. But more often, there was a meal to have, there was treatment to get, massage, cold tub, whatever's going on back there. And it could be 45 minutes to an hour. You just had to wait it out and be patient. Jose's got his back to us, sitting at his locker. And he had been demonstrative on the field and in the dugout after this replay. So I'm like, I was just thinking to myself, and I'm surely not the only one, but I was thinking to myself, why is he there? He didn't have his ball cap on. So his back's to us. So I walk over to him and I say, Jose, do you have a second? And like a friggin' like there was a spring on his chair. He popped up, reached for his ball cap on the top shelf of his locker stall, put it on, turned around, looked at me as everybody else swarmed over. The cameras came on, the microphones were there, and he said, let's go. And he went in on the whole replay system, which again at the time was relatively new. I can't remember, Griff. It might have been a year or two old, if that. But these replays are pointless. If the aim is to not get the call on the field correct, why have them at all? I'm paraphrasing. Shai Davidi's got if you Google it, Oakland 2014, Jose Bautista, it'll come up. Shai Davidi's story from a decade ago. But it was essentially that. And he just went to town. I'll never forget that.
Two more items about the Coliseum before we move on in our discussions on exit philosophy. The first one is, what was your impression? And many people saw it either live or on highlights later in the evening of Yusei Kikuchi's takedown of Tyler Soderstrom in extra innings on a pop fly just in front of the Blue Jays dugout, which is a long run from first base. So you gain momentum, you gain speed. And what was your impressions of the technique?
So I'm sitting there, and like the Coliseum is in many ways truly old school, and the dugouts are one of them. So the dugouts, as you saw, don't have any front railing. There's no netting and a railing to protect guys who are sitting right up on one of the benches you see in a lot of the new dugouts, even in the Rogers Center now. Like, go back and look at the early Skydome dugouts. They would remind you of what we just saw this weekend in Oakland. Things have been upgraded in almost every other stadium now. But so I'm sitting, I'm like, you say clearly, I'm thinking back to Pat Tabler's comments about the sky. It would make sense to me that you say would not, if he wasn't tracking the foul ball, the pop-up, he probably wouldn't have been able to find it. In that dugout, everybody's like standing around each other, trying to get just a view of the field. Some guys have finagled Gatorade coolers or whatever and are sort of sitting around. So I can see from Yusei's perspective that a turn to his right to go back into the dugout and go sideways or back down and sideways into the dugout might not have been an option. Probably the same with the turn to the left. So he's like, I'm just going to, take a couple steps out onto the field and just try to stay clear of this whole thing. And then he shoulder blocks Tyler Soderstrom with his pitching shoulder.
Yeah, that's
and it reminded me of this. I was an offensive lineman in high school, Griff. It kind of looked like a sled drill. Like Tyler Soderstrom was a sled, and you as an offensive lineman were getting your shoulder down and trying to push a guy back. It was a hell of a collision. I don't think outside of Oakland, you probably would be, because of the way dugouts are now in stadiums, I don't think you ever see that again.
I think that there are two things to think about there. The first is if Tyler Soderstrom had been aware of Kikuchi and hadn't been looking up for that pop fly, he would have braced himself, and the collision would have been far more damaging, even as athletic as Kikuchi is, would have been far more damaging than it turned out, because the element of surprise gave him what looked like a devastating takedown of the A's first baseman. But the second thing is that we haven't seen since that moment Kikuchi throw, because as you pointed out, it was his pitching shoulder. And the first thing he did was reach for it when he got up. And of course, everybody in the dugout had a big laugh, and the cameras kept going in there, and everybody was kidding him about it. But he's starting the game in Milwaukee on Tuesday. It'll be interesting to see whether his velocity is affected, whether his effectiveness and command are affected. But he had already thrown his bullpen session to between starts, so we won't really get to see that, and it concerns me going into Milwaukee on Tuesday. The other
thing, it reminds me, Mark Pryor, who had a bunch of issues with his shoulder, I think Mark Pryor had a collision running the bases with then Atlanta Braves second baseman Marcus Giles in either 2003 or 2004, and he missed a few weeks, because his pitching shoulder, his right shoulder, caught the brunt of it. So let's just hope Yusei's okay. I mean, that was probably the first time Yusei's ever been interviewed after a game that he didn't start.
Yusei, can you come out to the screen, please?
Yeah.
But so the other injury similar to that was, for me, the fight between the Yankees and the Red Sox when Greg Nettles searched out Bill Lee and looked like he dislocated Spaceman's left shoulder, because he comes out of that fight and everybody wanted a piece of Bill Lee because he was so flaky, and in those days flakiness was not next to godliness, and so his arm is hanging down, and it cost him pretty much the rest of that season. But yeah, these things, they look funny, and it was a hilarious incident, but we'll see how it turns out. We'll have to wait until Tuesday when he goes out there. Hopefully, that it was just a momentary grasping of his own shoulder from the
and the last thing, Griff, is the walk, as I previewed earlier, to and from the Bay Area Rapid Transit. So that we'll call it BART from now on, because that's what they call it out there, BART, BART. So we would stay into
that. I've always found it amazing that Bart Giamatti, who suspended Pete Rose in 1989 for life and then passed away tragically, weeks and months after his death, it became the San Francisco and Oakland World Series, which was called the Bart Series. And the coincidence always strikes me, and it doesn't seem to strike anybody else that I speak to. So I'll just throw it out there again.
And again, if you're young and you don't know who Bart Giamatti was, he was the commissioner who banned Pete Rose for life for gambling on baseball in 1989. And you probably know his son better than you know him. And that's the actor, Paul Giamatti.
Yeah, and
So
Bart Giamatti to me gave me the best advice as a father that I can remember. And we were at a party at Charles Bronfman's, and I said, "Hey, my son, which is my eldest son, Matt, I said I'd really like him to go to Yale because Bart Giamatti was famous for his association with Yale University." And he looked at me and knew I was a baseball PR guy, and he goes, "You better start saving right now." And that was sage advice.
yeah,
And Matt ended up going to Guelph and having a great education. So
there you go.
God bless you, Bart.
Yeah.
But
One
we were talking
of your
about
first encounters with the reality of finances in the
of
Ivy
being
League.
baseball for life. Yes.
Yeah. But the
But
so
talking
the
about the
walk,
walk.
so the walk, the Coliseum is right next to Oracle, or what was Oracle Arena, where the Golden State Warriors used to play. So it's a complex. There's parking lots that surround it. Look, it's a tough part of town. There's a grit, and you can romanticize it. It's not. I'm not sitting here and saying it's all negative, but there is a grit to the city of Oakland. They call it the town out there. San Francisco's the city, Oakland's the town. You sometimes see that on the Golden State Warriors alternate jerseys. I think they used to be the town when they played in Oakland. Now they have an alternate jersey that says the city on it, San Francisco. When you get out of the subway, you ascend a couple of flights of stairs, and you are immediately met with a corridor of concrete and then chain link fence that bends inward. It's not fully covered, but bends inward to discourage any would-be climbers. And that corridor is essentially a footbridge that takes you over a canal that, depending on the time of day, and I don't believe it has anything to do with the tides, but depending on the time of day, is either full or empty. What's in the water, I'm not going to speculate, but it really feels, Griff, like, in a way, a march of the condemned. And it is such that there's really, if you're taking the subway, only one way in, one way out. And so when we would cover night games, whoever was the second last Blue Jays beat writer to finish their work, and you're smirking, but you know what I mean, would wait for the last Blue Jays beat writer to finish their work, because that's not a walk you want to be taking alone. I'm just being real about it. Not a walk you want to be taking alone at 11:30 at night or midnight to get back to the subway station and take you back into San Francisco. And I believe, because you and I have told this story before, that, and it was probably me, because I would just go on, but you waited for me one night, and that's when we took the BART back into San Francisco and ended up at the now defunct Steph's and had 9 pints in 2.5 hours.
That's right. It used to be because of the 3-hour time difference that people were on deadline, especially print media was on deadline. And so it would be a quick wrap up. You'd go down to the clubhouse, get some quotes, come back up to the press box, finish, insert the quotes, send it, and you're ready to go. But then came the advent of the internet, and every newspaper expected another story for the internet, which left, the ability to spend 2 hours after a game writing. So that changed the sequence of events. And I think at that point, we made last call at Steph's, nice little place. I think
Did we order like 5 each for last call? Because
I finished filing from there for the morning, the internet, the people that came in to handle the Star online. And so then we wandered up the rest of the way to the hotel, and boom, that's it. But That's because you have to wait for the last guy coming out of the press box. Otherwise, you may never see him again.
Yeah, yeah. And boom, that's it. That night was true because I fell face down on my bed when I got back to my hotel room, which I have no recollection of getting back to, and I woke up in my clothes from the day before. That was one of those nights. So some memories of Oakland, and it's kind of sad. I was thinking about it, Griff. Boston became Milwaukee, became Atlanta, with the Braves franchise. The Athletics have been Philadelphia, Kansas City, Oakland, and will now become Sacramento,
And then
paving the way to what we believe will be Las Vegas.
I don't think you can realistically keep a major league team out of Las Vegas after the success that the football and the hockey teams have had.
Oh, I'm not saying Major League Baseball is not going to end up there. I'm just saying that John Fisher's a complete moron, and if someone is capable of screwing this up, it would be him. But baseball will end up there at some point. John Fisher's the owner of the A's. But they will stop in Sacramento for a few years, and I believe they're not going to be called the A's. They're simply going to be the Sacramento Athletics.
I think they're gonna even leave Sacramento off. I think they're just the Athletics. They're not going to identify it by the city.
Oh, amazing. Okay. All right. So there you go. And Austin Adams, the Athletics reliever, could theoretically pitch for both Sacramento teams next year, the Athletics, and then he could be DFA'd if he continues to pitch like he pitched this weekend against the Jays and end up signing with the San Francisco Giants and pitching for their AAA team, which is based out of that stadium in Sacramento. That's a whole other story.
Yeah, that's a whole other story. But Austin Adams is typical of what you get when you have a payroll where the 26-man roster featured Aledmus Diaz at $8 million as the highest paid Oakland A's player for the weekend series against the Jays. And second was Seth Brown at $2.6 million. That's crazy. The Jays had 10 players making more than the $8 million that Aledmus Diaz made. So if you can get the starter out of the game early and not have to face Mason Miller, their 102-mile-an-hour closer, then you got a very good chance, which is why the A's went from a 17-17 start to where they are now, right down among the bottom three teams in baseball again.
Do you want to do, we're kind of talking this out live, just because I want to make sure that we allot appropriate time to things. Do you want to touch on the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame ceremony coming up this weekend now, or save it till the end?
Yeah, no,
there's a lot of Jays stuff we got to get to.
Yeah, I'll do it quickly now. For those who have never been to St. Mary's, this Saturday, the 15th of June, there's going to be a ceremony at the museum at the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. The induction is going to include Russell Martin, Jimmy Key, Ashley Stevenson, who is a true Hall of Famer, who was a legend with the women's Canadian baseball program. Rod Heisler, a left-hander who a lot of people aren't aware of, but has a record for most times wearing Canada across his chest in terms of men's senior programs. So Rod Heisler is getting a long-awaited entry. Howie Burney, who is one of the legendary volunteers in Ontario baseball and Canadian baseball as an executive coach and umpire, and then Paul Godfrey. So that ceremony will take place in St. Mary's, which is about 45 minutes from London, off of the 401. If you've never been there and you have young kids who play baseball, who are interested in baseball, take them, sons, daughters. It's a great day at the Hall of Fame. Thursday night at Rogers Center, there's a charity banquet with a silent auction. All of the guests that will be at the Hall of Fame on Saturday will be there. There's no Blue Jays game, but the event is taking place at the Corona rooftop, where anybody who's been to the outfield section of the renovated Rogers Center knows where that is. It'll include food, booze, and a contribution, a way to support the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame, which is a tremendous place to go and visit. That's about it. The rooftop patio party is from 6 to 10 on Thursday evening.
Congratulations to all the inductees.
Absolutely.
Wonderful accomplishment and great for Russell Martin, who had really an awesome career. He really did. And baseball.
The most important part of Russell Martin's career is to see that every team he went to the playoffs consecutive years, and some, like the Pirates, hadn't been even 500. The Pirates hadn't been 500 since Barry Bonds left. Then Russ Martin showed up and they went to the playoffs 2 years in a row. Dodgers his final 2 years, Yankees when he went to the Yankees, and then of course the Blue Jays in 2015 and 16, his first 2 years, they went to the postseason. So that's the sign of an important player.
Yeah, and I remember back then, people were like, well, how can you attribute that to Russell Martin? And look, everybody contributes. And I clearly remember looking up, because Russell came to the Jays in 2015, looking up Pirates pitchers' ERAs from 2014 when they threw to Russell and when they threw to his backup, who I believe at the time was Chris Stewart. And the juxtaposition or the disparity was pretty significant, and that was the effect Russell had on the game from a catching point of view, a defensive point of view. And needless to say, he had some big hits, big home runs in his time with the Blue Jays as well. And Jimmy Key takes me right back to my youth, right there with Dave Stieb, from some of those great mid to late 80s and early 90s Blue Jays teams. And what a way for Jimmy's time in Toronto to cap off with the 92 World Series, and how well he pitched, particularly in Game 4 of that series. And I was at that game, and he walked off when Cito came to get him. He had a wonderful outing. Jays went up 3-1 at the time, winning that game, and he doffed his cap. And a Blue Jay first and foremost, who of course went on to pitch for the Yankees and Orioles. So Jay's stuff, Griff, because that's why people are listening to us, and a lot has happened. So as we sit here right now on Monday, June the 10th, first of all, to you, Rich, to my dad, to everybody listening who is a father, happy Father's Day this coming Sunday, because I don't think we're going to do another episode before Father's Day unless something unforeseen happens. Some changes to this team. They're a game under 500. They just took 2 out of 3 from Oakland. Some of the same themes, pitching pretty good. The middle game of the Oakland series, the offense opened up. They did sneak out a victory on Sunday, but from a first 9 innings perspective, hit and miss offensively. Friday night was an offensive dud, even though Chris Bassett was excellent on the mound. But let's start with Cavan Biggio being designated for assignment. And you and I have talked about merit. And a couple of episodes ago, you said, hey, let's come up with 3 things this team needs to do right now. And one of mine was merit. I don't care what your name is. If you're hitting and you're playing well, more playing time. If you're not, less. And Cavan Biggio's interesting because he's an at the margins, somewhat fringe or utility player on this team, similar to an Ernie Clement in terms of role, can play multiple positions, left-handed bat versus Clement's right-handed bat. Get what I'm saying? A Daniel Vogelbach, who's far more limited, arguably a power left-handed bat, but doesn't really have a defensive position. If he reaches base, needs to be pinch run for late in the game. So I'm thinking to myself, don't overthink this. When I find out Biggio's DFA'd on Friday before the Oakland series begins, my first reaction is, wow. Okay, I was shocked. And my second thought is, This is, again, it doesn't strike at the heart of this core or this era of player. But given Cavan's last name, that dad is an ex-major leaguer, and like Vladdy's dad, unlike Bo's dad, but like that, Vladdy's dad is a Hall of Famer, and that Vladdy, Bo, and Cavan came up together, won championships in the minor leagues, did so at Double-A, managed by John Schneider. Even though he's sort of at the margins or a little bit more to the fringe of this roster than true core guys like Vladdy and Bo, this is a shock to the system because of the depth of his relationship with this organization, the length of time that Cavan Biggio has been in this organization, and the relationships that he holds with players. And I'm not saying he's Vlad's best friend or Bo's best friend. I don't know that. But what I'm saying is they were kind of packaged together because of their minor league accomplishments, because of their fathers, because they came up around the same time, all in the 2019 season between April and June. This is a shock to the system. And that was my first thought.
Yeah, as you point out, I really don't believe that Cavan Biggio would still have been a Blue Jay as long as he was if his father hadn't been a major leaguer, as you point out, along with Vlad and Bo. That being said, in terms of merit, I didn't see why Cavan Biggio, who has, compare him to Daniel Vogelbach. Daniel Vogelbach, Cavan runs better, has more defensive ability at 3 different positions, was actually the #1 backup in right field for George Springer. And you don't need a pinch runner in late innings. In fact, he was the pinch runner in late innings for Vogelbach or for Alejandro Kirk. So in terms of merit, I did not see Cavan Biggio being let go in favor of Daniel Vogelbach. I thought Daniel Vogelbach, and we had mentioned also the possibility of Ernie Clement, because Ernie Clement had been struggling defensively in several of his previous outings, and as a defensive specialist, that's not a good combination. And he also didn't play the outfield. So there's 2 players, and everybody pointed out on social media how Cavan takes too many called third strikes, takes too many strikes, wasn't the player, seemed to be deteriorating as an offensive player. But in terms of immediate contributions and merit, I didn't think that was the move that should be made at that time. But since then, we've seen their decision that they would like, and we had agreed, we had said that Spencer Horwitz was on his way up and he needed to play once he got here. And the belief was that moving Vlad to third base would open up room to potentially, as a left-handed hitter, use Spencer Horwitz at first base against a lot of right-handed pitchers. But he was playing a lot of second base, mostly second base, in the last 2 weeks at Buffalo. So Horwitz is being given a shot at second base, a position that he had never played in the majors, had played in the minors, which, leads us, and we've discussed this in the past, they're putting less emphasis now, clearly, on run prevention and defense, and they really need to find guys that can contribute offensively. And with the versatility that they now have, and with the ability or with the intent of having Dalton Varsho be their backup right fielder and also hopefully mostly play center field with Schneider, with Davis Schneider being the regular left fielder, that means that they do have a legit 4th outfielder, and that would be Kevin Kiermaier, because they have to have IKF playing every day the way he's swinging the bat, and he can play second base or third base. But with Spencer Horwitz there playing second base, he will clearly become primarily a third baseman for this team. I think we've said in the last 2 weeks that they really needed to do something now. They couldn't wait, and it had to be impactful. And I think that despite the fact that Spencer Horwitz is a rookie, that he doesn't have much major league experience. I mean, you look at guys that come up and make impact with major league teams, they don't have the numbers that Horwitz had. They don't have the plus in walks over strikeouts that he's got. Guy can clearly handle the bat. The Blue Jays didn't have enough of that. And so I like the move to bring him up. I'm just shocked on the merit-based release or DFA of Cavan Biggio, because he could end up being traded. To me, he ends up with the Houston Astros, where his dad is still an executive. They have a guy named Trey Cabbage who pretty much does the same thing Cavan does, only he doesn't play the infield. And it would be a perfect landing spot, but they don't need to make a trade. They can wait until he clears waivers, and then they can negotiate a deal, because you can be sure that he would, if given the choice as a free agent, sign with that organization.
So that would make Cabbage less regular?
Yeah.
You can
That's
usually
right.
count on Cabbage for regularity, but maybe not. Maybe not anymore.
I know it'd be roughage for him, but
we should probably get off the whole Trey Cabbage thing. Yeah. So when I repeat what I said earlier, I don't necessarily believe that this was the intent, because it's a math equation. It's data driven. It's a lot of what you said in terms of who can play where. We knew that Spencer Horwitz was getting reps at second base in Buffalo, and we drew the conclusion, well, that could bring an Ernie Clement into focus. We didn't consider that it could be Cavan. I said it, you said it, the word was shocked. And an unintended consequence, which isn't necessarily a negative thing. It probably doesn't swing the goalposts one way or the pendulum one way or the other. Is, Griff, it's kind of akin to lighting a stick of dynamite and sticking it up this team's you-know-what. Like, that guy who's been here since 2019, that guy with the depth of the relationship to the organization and with a lot of the players he's come up with, his family name, he's a good guy, he's dedicated to his craft, et cetera, et cetera. If it can happen to him, we might drill this hole down a little further toward the core if you guys don't pull it together. I'm not saying that was the intent of the move, because I know this front office doesn't think that way. But what I'm saying is it's a shock to the system that could produce that result. Whether this team and this personnel is good enough to carry it to a much better record than they have so far, that's going to play out. But I do believe that there's a resulting shock to the system here.
Yeah, I agree that it will have reverberation throughout the clubhouse, but I don't think it's as cold-hearted as it seems, because Cavan Biggio did have an option left on his minor league, on his contract. But so he would have had to, because he reached 5 years in the second week of May. You add days of service together, and when they reach 172, that equals a full year. So he reached 4 years and 172 days, which makes 5 years in the second week of May, which meant at that point, as a 5+ year player, to use an option on that guy, you have to get his permission. So clearly, they had to ask permission to option him. And, you know, in his mind, he's a major leaguer. In my mind, he's a major leaguer. And so he was optioned in previous years because of his struggles at the plate. But they would have had a spot for him in Buffalo. The Bisons could have used him. So clearly he had input in this, didn't want the option, took being DFA'd as the only other, like that was the other option. You either send him out with his permission or you have to DFA him. I think that he had a big part in that decision, and maybe he thinks that he should move on to another organization where he might get
Yeah.
a better chance.
I just think Griff, we got to think about this from the player's perspective. And I don't think that there's anybody who would hold this against Cavan, but just in case there is, I mean, at this point, you're telling me if I'm Cavan, we're moving on. So I could go down to Buffalo, but then I'm counting on an injury that would necessitate the selection of my contract.
Yeah,
you know what I mean, or my recall.
I think it just
It's time to move on when this happens.
The whole process, as far as Cavan is concerned, as
Yeah.
far as Cavan himself is concerned, because if he had gone to Buffalo, he would have had to count on other teams scouting him for the Bisons, some injury happening with one of the 29 other teams, and they go, hey, Cavan Biggio is available. Let's see if the Jays will give him up, which obviously they would. So by forcing the issue at this point before he gets sent to Buffalo, I think it just hastens what teams already know about this player. They don't need to see him get plate appearances at AAA. And
Right.
so, it makes sense if he was a participant in this, that this is the course of action that he preferred.
Right. And if and to take my idea one step further, I'm down in Buffalo for 6 or 8 weeks, and say an Ernie Clement gets hurt. Well, what if Orelvis Martinez has shown himself at second base enough that the front office is comfortable with Martinez's ability to defend at the major league level, and then it's Orelvis getting an opportunity to make his major league debut before Cavan is called up, because that's the direction the Jays are going in. So it's better to just cut the cord at this point.
He might have found himself
well.
at Buffalo with Casey Candell using him in the same role that he had up here. And you look at camera shots in the dugout over the last 2 weeks, and you could see that Cavan Biggio wasn't involved, was quite just, he looked dazed and confused. And we all wish him nothing but the best moving forward. And I hope he has a successful career the rest of his, because he's still a young man. So, he's still in his 20s.
Good soldier, and obviously comes from a good family, and hopefully he lands on his feet.
As a PR guy for 4 years, from his rookie season till 22, he was one of my favorite players to deal with, and he's one of my favorite young men in that clubhouse.
Yeah, so we certainly wish him well. The Jays, so they were set up nicely in the Oakland series, Griff, for the bullpen day in the series finale on Sunday, because they got 8 from Chris Bassett on Friday night, and essentially they didn't use anybody out of the bullpen on Friday night, because it took one Chad Green pitch in a 1-1 game in the bottom of the 9th for JJ Bleday to jack one over the right field wall. So, I mean, Chad Green's warm-up pitches plus the one hanging slider he threw to Bleday, good night. And then Kevin Gausman went out and threw a complete game shutout on Saturday. So everybody was available for the bullpen day on Sunday. It turned out to be a 10-inning success story. The Jays opened it up with a 3-run top of the 10th and then won the game by 2. So the ghost runner scored for Oakland, but that was it against Genesis Cabrera. I mean, my thought on this is that it's not going to be like that every turn through.
Well,
so
you can say the Blue Jays were lucky. I think the Blue Jays were lucky to take 2 out of 3 in that series. They could very easily have lost 2 out of 3, or maybe even been swept. But
Griff, if they don't score in the top of the 8th on Sunday, they lose, because Mason Miller would have locked them down in the 9th. They did
win 2 out of 3. That's right. That's why the steal by Varsho of third and the sac fly were huge, because Mason Miller came in and was effective, did his thing, but it was in a tie game, because you knew they weren't going to score in time.
I'll just say, before you make your point, for the small ball folks, it's Varsho stealing third after the bunt that got him to second that That fly ball would have put Varsho on third with 2 outs if it had just been the bunt and not the stolen base. So for anybody getting all excited about the bunt, it's Varsho's stolen base. Dalton deserves the credit.
Yeah, my point just to finish was that there's a lot of people thinking, well, it was only Oakland and they were 5-1 against the White Sox, and it was only the White Sox. But they play everybody, and so does everybody else play all the teams in baseball. So now you go, okay, great. They're 1 game under 500 as we record right now, going into Milwaukee for a 3-game series. And the upcoming 20 games, I believe, are all contenders. They're all legitimate good teams, including the Boston Red Sox, who have been playing, getting better pitching, and have some players, position players that are stepping up on the way to stardom. So that's not going to be an easy stretch of games. We saw against Baltimore the last time they played a really good team, lost the first 2 games. People are giving up hope because neither of the 2 games were close. Then they came back and squeezed out a couple of wins. So this team can be competitive against good teams, but they're not going to have the dominant starting pitching performances against any of the teams coming up that they had with Bassett and Gausman back to back. They're just not going to, because Oakland is not a good team. But they can be competitive, and they need the bullpen to be better, the bullpen to be deeper, no weak links, because the pitching chain is only as good as its weakest link. And the Blue Jays have had too many moments where someone has failed in a key situation in a game, and they played 8 out of 9 solid innings, and the 1 inning where the bullpen let up and they lose the game. So that's a stretch coming up where this is going to happen unless these guys in the bullpen step up.
How long until Uriel Rodriguez is back? Because
he's got to start tomorrow. He has a start scheduled tomorrow where he's going to throw about 70 pitches, which is Tuesday. So that would be Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So maybe the beginning of the week after, where he would be that guy instead of a bullpen day. He would be considered the 5th starter.
Because the Jays are off Thursday, right? So they can go. They can go
have him pitch the next Monday.
Yeah, you don't need a 5th starter until Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday if you wanted to wait like a week. Right. Tuesday.
Yeah, that's what they would do Tuesday. So be a week between starts, and to me, he becomes that 5th starter, meaning that Bowden Francis goes into long relief, and Trevor Richards is not needed. Trevor Richards in bursts of 2 innings every 2 or 3 days is far more effective, and the stats show you, than Trevor Richards with 5 days rest as a starter, like as an opener. You don't want that, because his effectiveness relies on a little bit of fatigue and pitching every 2 days and pitching in high leverage. So he's more valuable that way. So you need a guy like Yariel Rodriguez to step up and come in and be that 5th guy.
You think they can manage? Let's just assume Rodriguez stays healthy. They can manage the pitch counts and the innings from here on out such that he could complete the season. If you, I really like, I don't know is there a hard innings count here, or is it, because not all innings are the same, Griff. You have a 6-pitch, 3 up, 3 down inning. That is not the same as jamming the bases and throwing 27 pitches and having to get a big strikeout to escape. You know what I mean? Like
John Schneider pointed out about Y-Rod, that if he is a starter and has a every 5th day routine with the occasional 6th day because of off days that are included, it's much better for a guy who took a full year off of professional pitching. Don't say that he didn't pitch in 2023. He just didn't pitch for a team. He threw. So now if you have your routine between starts, that is going to help to extend a guy like Yariel Rodriguez later into the season. And, who knows what the situation is going to be in terms of the Blue Jays competing for a wild card. But if the Jays are competing and they need him as a fifth starter, I'm sure they will try and extend him as far as he can go. I mean, he's signed for, I think, 5 years. Is that what they announced?
A
5 years?
four-year deal,
4
was it
years?
not? So
Yeah,
3
4
years
years,
beyond this.
32. Yeah.
Yeah.
So at that figure and those numbers, you expect that they signed him to be a starting pitcher. They're not going to pull him back in 2024 if he's a part of perhaps getting to the postseason again. I think they need that pitcher in the fifth spot. They thought it might be Alek Manoah, but it's not. And so, I think they'd be willing to push him a little bit, but I think he definitely needs to have a routine where he can prep both medically and mentally, given the fact that he didn't pitch in pro ball last year.
Yeah, Manoah's surgery is going to be, as we sit here right now, it's going to be next week. And I mean, the reporting Shai Davidi and others have done, Griff, is that, look, they're gonna have to open him up and then determine whether it's the full Tommy John, which would be a 12 to 18 month recovery. So you would imagine that would be like start of July. So like All-Star break next year at the earliest, could even extend further. Or, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend to know what the hell they do in there. I don't have a DR in front of my name in a stunning development, but that there's a so-called bridge surgery or something they can do. They can brace it.
It shortens the recovery time by a couple of months, but
yeah, but
I think
it's too bad.
Yeah, I think for Alek Manoah, in terms of long term, because he's 26, so by the time he comes back, he'll be approaching 28, maybe, let's say. But I think this is like when they say, have you tried unplugging your computer and plugging it back in? To me, this could be Alek Manoah's unplugging and plugging back in, and everything has run together, and it's been very difficult mentally for a young man who's never experienced failure. He's now going to have a period of time where there are no expectations. It's not Alek Manoah bailed on his teammates like everybody was saying last year. He bailed on the team. He wouldn't report, he this and that. There's a program. He's recovering from surgery. There's a date where he is expected to be able to throw again. We've seen a lot of people come back from Tommy John and do as well or better. So I think in a way, if the Jays can fill in with fifth starter and develop others in the minor league system, which, there's not a long line, there's not a conga line of starting pitchers waiting for the opportunity. He could come back and still be a contributor before he reaches the age of 28, which to me would be probably a benefit to a guy whose brain has been scrambled over the last 12 months.
His situation it sucks right now that he's hurt, but in the search for silver linings, Griff, and you outlined one, I'll outline another. From a strictly business point of view, if this had happened while Alek Manoah was still out on option, if he'd gotten hurt pitching for AAA Buffalo, he's not accruing major league service time throughout the totality of this injury. This happened while he was a Toronto Blue Jay on the active 26-man roster. So for the rest of this year and into next year, he is accruing major league service time, which for him is important because it inches you closer to free agency and all of that stuff. So personally for him, on the professional side, the business side of this, if it had to happen, it's a big deal that it happened pitching at the big league level.
That's a great point, Scotty. And I hadn't thought of that, but in terms of easing the mindset for a guy who's 26, 27, who had great expectations, whose family backs him 100%, and he's helping, financially with everyone involved. I think that is a great point, is that he's accumulating service time. And, we'll see where it goes. But hopefully this is not the end for Alek Manoah, but it is the reset button.
Blue Jays have a 3-game series in Milwaukee starting tonight, and we are with you on the afternoon of Monday, June the 10th, as we record this live. The Milwaukee Brewers lead the National League Central, and I believe last I checked, it's by 6.5 games over the Chicago Cubs and St. Louis Cardinals. So they're not running away with it, but they are threatening to run away with it. Then, after an off day Thursday, Friday the 14th through Sunday the 16th, the Cleveland Guardians are at Rogers Center. They lead the American League Central, and by a reasonable margin over a pretty good Kansas City Royals team. And even the Twins are over 500 in that division. But the Guardians are not your Guardians of 3 years ago. All pitch, all defense, no pop. This team hits home runs, scores a lot of runs, and pitches well. Then it's off to Fenway for 3 games in Boston, Monday to Wednesday next week. Off day the following weekend, 3 in Cleveland. Sorry, I should say the Jays are home to Boston, then go to Cleveland, then go to Fenway for 3. Then at the end of the month, come back home and host the Yankees for 4 before playing the Astros for 4, the first of which is Monday afternoon, Canada Day, before going to Seattle, who lead the American League West, for the annual jaunt where BC and Alberta descend on Seattle and turn it into a great party. And that's the start of a long Western trip. Seattle, San Francisco for 3, Arizona for 3. Like Griff, in terms of quality of opponent, there are some off days mixed in, but the next month and a half is no joke. So, and even if you're playing a quote lesser opponent out on the West Coast, there's just something about going out there. It's not easy. So don't sleep on the Giants. Diamondbacks were in the World Series last year. And that's a month and a half or a month and a bit away. Like the next 6 weeks, we're going to know. We're going to know for sure.
Yeah, here's some numbers that I've found interesting in researching the next power rankings. Is that there's 5 current teams currently at 600 winning percentage or above. Consider those the 5 elite teams. And that includes Cleveland, that includes the Yankees and the Orioles, that includes the Phillies and the Dodgers. So that's the 5 elite teams. But there's 14 teams, almost half of the teams in Major League Baseball that are grouped within 5 games of 500, either 5 games above, 5 games below. So there's a 5-game gap for 14 teams. And several of those 14 teams are going to be playoff teams, postseason teams, because there's 5 at 600 and above. There's 3 more above, more than 5 games above 500. So that still leaves a bunch of playoff teams from that group hovering on either side of 500. Somebody's going to break out of that pack. Going to be very difficult for the Blue Jays because, as you point out, as you went down that schedule, it's not an easy portion of the schedule. But baseball is so even compared to like the NBA, where the Boston Celtics have romped in 2 games against the Dallas Mavericks, and I think both semifinals, both conference championships were 4-game sweeps. So it's different. And this is the starting pitcher, the bad bounce, your left-handed starter crushing the first baseman as he goes for a pop-up. There's all sorts of factors that factor into this. And that's what makes baseball the most even, hard to predict sport of all the major North American professional sports.
We'll see how it plays out. Jay's got 3 in Milwaukee, 3 home with Cleveland, with an off day in between before Griff and I bring you the next episode of the Exit Philosophy podcast, which we will record next Monday. And nothing firm yet to announce on our next live post-game show at youtube.com/@exitphilosophy. But we were with you after last Wednesday night's win at home over the Baltimore Orioles. Griff and I had a lot of fun. Really appreciated the interaction, answered some of your questions, responded to some of your comments, and generated content. Well, I'm misusing the word. youtube.com/@exitphilosophy. And we also post the video audio versions of each and every Exit Philosophy podcast episode to that YouTube page. Griffsthepitch.com is where you can get all of Griff's work, multiple weekly columns. He mentioned earlier his weekly power rankings column and some of the research he put in to determine that. So look for that. And there are some great conversations, current and former Blue Jays, former Montreal Expos, all up at griffsthepitch.com, and also the Exit Philosophy podcast episodes. So throw Griff a subscription. He would appreciate it. I know that. And with all of that said, we thank you for listening. Please subscribe. Please like. Please give us a 5-star review on the Apple Podcasts. We'd love that too. Tell your friends. We are with you each and every Monday, and we thank you so much for listening.
Thanks, Scotty, and thanks everyone for listening. We'll talk to you next week.